Now, what is validation? Validation is pretty much we're just validating, we're making sure our requirements are as thorough, as complete as they can be. Now, how is that done? Well, I'm going to show you a little diagram here that kind of represents the, I suppose, the validation part of the requirements engineering process. So we're going to have, I might have drawn those a little too small, but I'll make it work. So we begin on this side with our inputs. So these are the inputs of the validation process, and this is the outputs of our validation process. So let's go ahead and call this our requirements, and I'll just abbreviate that as such, and then I'll do requirements validation, which will just say valid, or we can just do validate. So our inputs, we're going to have our requirements documentation. Again, going to abbreviate that. So our requirements documentation we did in the specification phase of the requirements engineering process. Then we're going to have our organizational standards. So these are just going to be the standards in which the organization has for like documentation, etc., and as well as all their functionality standards. And organization knowledge. So all the knowledge the organization or the client has. So what we're doing, we're taking all those inputs, we're putting them in our requirement validation process, and then they're going to produce two outputs. And these two outputs are firstly a list of problems. So these would be the requirements that I suppose need to be solved. And then we're going to have the agreed actions. And these will be the agreed solutions to solve these problems. So these agreed actions will then come to solve those list of problems. And it's very important to have your requirements documentation complete at this point, because otherwise you're going to be solving for the wrong list of problems. And like I've mentioned several times before, and I'll probably sound like a broken record, but because it's so important, if you don't catch that requirement error before the coding step, if you catch in the delivery process, it's going to be 100 times more expensive for the end system, as if you just caught it in this validation process, perhaps. So who is going to be part of this validation process? First, you should assemble a validation team. And pretty much this validation team, not really going to draw it out. I might draw just a few people to show that it needs to be a team. So this is our validation team, and we need people of varying backgrounds. So this person might be an actual developer. This might be someone from the client side. This might be, let's say this is a medical system that we're working on. This could be a doctor that obviously knows a lot about medicine, etc. And we can also have a lawyer on the validation team. A lot of these things just have these different backgrounds and different skills. And this is because it's going to increase the overall domain of knowledge. And that's exactly what we want when we validate our requirements, to make sure, hey, is this programmable? Hey, is this useful for medicine? Will doctors use this? And hey, is the stuff that we're doing, is it done before? Do we need to go through legal, through copyrights and all that? So I'll just do developer, M for doctor, and then for this we'll do lawyer. So having this range of people on our validation team really answers these questions. And some of these questions will then further answer what we need to answer in our validation. And which is pretty much we're going to do another checklist. So we're going to have a validation checklist similar to what we had in the analysis, except this is kind of our final check to see if we have valid requirements and valid actions to meet those requirements. So our validation team is going to work on this requirement validation, spit out our list of problems, and spit out our agreed actions. And these list of problems have to abide by this checklist. And the first one is understandability. So pretty much, hey, can a reader of this list of problems and agreed actions, if they were to read this document, could they understand what you were trying to say, is pretty much all it is. Then we have redundancy. You want to make sure that a problem isn't repeated twice. Obviously, otherwise you'll be solving the same problem twice. More code, more time, more money. The next, completeness. Sorry about that. Completeness. Just repeat that. Complete. Are your requirements complete? Did you forget anything in this requirements documentation, organizational standards, and organizational knowledge? If you're using these three inputs effectively, essentially you'll have all of your problems, so this should not be a problem. And then of course we have ambiguity, which is very relatable to understandability. If someone reads this list of problems or the agreed actions, they're not going to be able to take that two different ways. And if they do, that means it's ambiguous, and we do not want that for our list of problems and agreed actions, like I've mentioned several times throughout the requirements engineering process. And then pretty much once you have this requirements validated, you go through the requirement validation process, you can begin designing the overall system.